There's an old saying that all gentlemen wear hats, but not all hats are worn by gentlemen. And so it was to prove with Frederick Seddon, whose outwardly respectable appearance hid a very sinister side. It resulted in the murder of his lodger, Eliza Barrow, through arsenic poisoning, and his eventual trip to the gallows. This is Vintage Murders, and the callous and calculated murder of the rich lodger. Like all good stories, this account starts with the birth of Fred on the 21st of January 1872 in Liverpool to his parents William and Mary Seddon. He got married to Margaret on the 31st of December 1893 and they had 5 children. Important to this narrative is that he joined and was initiated into Liverpool's Freemason Stanley Lodge number 1325 in 1901. But he resigned from it in 1906 when he moved south. But he kept his connection to Freemasonry when he became a founder petitioner of a new lodge in Buckinghamshire. In 1909, he bought a 14-room house at 63 Tollington Park in Finsbury Park, London. By this time, he had risen to become Superintendent of Collection for the London and Manchester Assurance Company. Aside from Freemasonry, he dabbled with a business selling second-hand clothes, which he put in his wife's name, and speculated with property. Given his position in the insurance company, one wonders whether he was breaking office rules by effectively having an extra 2 jobs on the side. Seddon had an obsession with making money, and at one point toyed with the idea of swindling someone. In 1910, an eccentric 47-year-old spinster called Eliza Barrow replied to an advertisement for a second-floor flat in the Seddon household and moved in on the 26th of July. She was independently wealthy, having £1,600 in India stocks and shares, and owned a lease on a public house called the Buck's Head. She was miserly, and it was said that she had a rather unpleasant personality. At one point, she actually spat into the face of the wife of one of her cousins, and on another occasion, even her landlord. She was accompanied by her 9-year-old ward called Ernest Grant, who she adopted on the death of some close friends. She had previously shared lodgings with her cousin, the Vonders, but apparently moved to the Seddons as it worked out cheaper. But, being easily led, and as keen on making money as Seddon was himself, Barrow was quickly persuaded by him to sign over to him a controlling interest in all her savings and investments, including the £1,600 of India stock. In return for this, he would take care of her for the rest of her life, giving her a small annuity and allowing her to live at his home rent-free. In August 1911, the Seddons, Barrow, and her young ward went on holiday together to Southend. On their return to London, Maggie Seddon, one of the daughters, was asked to purchase a 3-penny packet of flypaper from the local chemist. At that time, one of its constituents in its manufacture was arsenic. According to the instructions on the packet, it had to be soaked in water before use. Arsenic in those days was widely used in many commercial applications, such as wallpaper, medicine, and cosmetics. Shortly after, Barrow began to suffer from agonizing stomach pains. The local doctor was called, who prescribed bismuth and morphine. On the 9th of September he visited her again, but by the following Monday her condition had deteriorated. Even so, she refused to go to hospital. She improved slightly for a few days, but was confined to her bed where, on the 13th of September, she made a will, dictated to and executed by Seddon and witnessed by his relatives. At 6:15 on the morning of the 14th of September, while being looked after by Mrs. Seddon, Barrow died. Seddon went to the doctor, who issued a death certificate without seeing the body, claiming that he was unable to attend due to overwork, brought on by an outbreak of cholera current in the area at the time. He certified that she had died from the epidemic. The following day, on the 15th of September, Seddon went to the undertaker and arranged a cheap funeral, which he paid for himself, keeping a small commission for the introduction. Barrow's burial took place in a common burial plot, although her family had a vault in Islington. Seddon's later explanation for this was that Barrow's family had snubbed his daughter during an earlier visit, and he was not prepared to allow his family to be treated in the same way again, and that if Barrow's family missed the funeral, it might teach them better manners for the future. Immediately after the funeral, the Seddon family left for Southend for a fortnight's holiday. Barrow's cousin, Frank Vonder, suspicious over the suddenness of the death and how quickly the funeral arrangements had been made, together with not having any notice of when the funeral was to take place, arrived to take over possession of her estate as executor. Seddon informed him that nothing was left, as he had paid the substantial funeral expenses and the cost of Ernest Grant's upkeep himself. The Vonder family were having nothing of this and went to the police and voiced their suspicions, which had grown as they unravelled Miss Barrow's finances. Initially she owned £1,600 in India stock, the property lease and certain savings. Until she had met Frederick Seddon, she was, to put it kindly, careful with her money, or so it seemed. The police were sufficiently concerned that they requested that Barrow's body be exhumed. This took place on the 15th of November 1911, and a full examination of the body was done by Sir William Wilcox, the senior Home Office specialist, and junior pathologist Bernard Spilsbury. They discovered about 2 grains of arsenic in the body. Wilcox stated at the trial that the body of a person dying from epidemic cholera would decompose rapidly in hot weather, and a person dying from acute arsenic poisoning would not decompose so rapidly because the arsenic would probably exert some preservative action. Spilsbury showed himself to be an outstanding witness for the prosecution, easily dealing with cross-examination by the junior defence barrister and demonstrating highly effective forensic techniques. Seddon and his wife became the chief suspects in what was by now a murder inquiry, and both were arrested and charged. It was revealed that Miss Barrow had taken out an annuity through Seddon, which was to pay her a regular sum each month for the rest of her life, and would cease on her death. Seddon purported to have set this up through the insurance company he worked for. However, in reality he kept the money himself. Suddenly we have a motive here. This is a man who is certainly capable of deceiving his employer and who claimed knowledge of the family burial vault. Did he know that if she had been interred there, it could be a chance that arsenic could be discovered if the body was exhumed? Hence the need to bury the body quickly, in a common grave. He admitted that instead of being a loyal employee of an insurance company and collecting his rightful commission, he had become his own insurance company with regards to the annuity and its payments to Miss Barrow. She had apparently signed over willingly the India stocks, other investments, and a property lease on a pub with the promise from Frederick of a decent monthly income for life. This is a man who is gambling that Eliza Barrow will die soon. Also the cousins find out that the Buck's Head and a barber shop have suddenly become the property of Seddon. It was very difficult in those days to trace property until the Land Registration Acts of 1924. Eliza Barrow was certainly a difficult woman and tight with money, yet she had been persuaded by Seddon to part with her property. His actions were too good to be true. She had arrived at 63 Tollington Park, a reasonably wealthy woman, and left a pauper. The only person to benefit from this largesse was Seddon. During the trial at the Old Bailey, the prosecution, led by the Attorney General Sir Rufus Isaacs, KC, proved that Margaret Seddon had previously bought a large amount of flypaper which contained arsenic. The renowned barrister Edward Marshall Hall, KC, led for the defence. He strongly resisted all claims that Barrow had been poisoned, claiming instead that she had died by taking a medicine containing arsenic. Despite the advice given by his counsel, Seddon insisted on giving evidence in his own defence. It was claimed that he turned the jury against himself through his arrogant and condescending attitude. Certainly, his case was not helped by his ridiculous claim that Barrow might have drunk water from the dishes of flypaper that had been placed in her room. Despite solid pleadings from the defence team, the jury took just 1 hour to find him guilty. Margaret Seddon was acquitted of any involvement in the murder. Marshall Hall always maintained that Seddon would have been acquitted had he not insisted on giving evidence, having warned him of the risks such an action would be in the witness box. The damage had been done. He had condemned himself to the gallows. But the Seddon case became part of popular culture, where a Freemason calls upon another Mason in his hour of need. As a former Freemason, on being asked by the clerk of the court if he had anything to say as to why the sentence of death should not be passed against him, Seddon replied at length and appealed directly to the judge, Sir Thomas Bucknell, as a brother Mason and in the name of the great architect of the universe, to overturn the jury's guilty verdict. According to some sources, he gave the first-degree sign. According to others, the sign of grief and distress, begging for mercy. The judge is reported as having said, with some emotion, "It is not for me to harrow your feelings. Try to make peace with your Maker. We both belong to the same brotherhood, and that can have no influence with me. This is painful beyond words to have to say what I am saying, but our brotherhood does not encourage crime. It condemns it." Seddon replied that he had already made his peace with his Maker. Mr. Justice Bucknell then pronounced a sentence of death. Bernard Spilsbury, who went on to become a famous pathologist and who gave evidence during the trial, was not yet involved in Freemasonry, and so the meaning of what had passed between Seddon and Bucknell was lost on him at the time. However, his colleagues who also provided forensic evidence were Masons, and they were aware of its significance. Seddon was hanged by executioners John Ellis and Thomas Pierpoint at Pentonville Prison on the 18th of April 1912. But what of Margaret Seddon? She was found not guilty. It is very difficult to gauge a jury's view of her. Like her husband, she agreed to go into the witness box, and the transcript reveals that she was a terrible wreck and broke down in tears when cross-examined. After the trial, she went to live in Liverpool, where she met a Mr. Cameron, and they got married on the 4th of November 1912, less than 7 months after her husband's execution. They later emigrated to the United States. She died in Manchester, Connecticut in the early 1960s. We do not suppose that she mentioned the fate of her first husband at dinner parties, but as Marshall Hall pointed out, nobody saw anyone administering the poison.